Thank you, everybody, for joining on time. We'll give just a minute more before we get started.
Jay, are you able to record your session?
Yeah,
Okay.
I've started recording. Thank you, one and all, for joining. We at TaUB are excited to start our this webinar series that we have continued over the past 14 odd months now. I will briefly give you some housekeeping tips so that we are all on the same page. We have already started recording the webinar. Just want to keep you posted that this will be recorded. And at the same time, as and when the participants join in, they will be on mute. So do not, I just hope you will not be disturbing the others by the time when you join in. Okay. I will also give you a brief introduction about our company. Just a moment. So we are TaUB Solutions. We are basically TaUB stands for taking you beyond. We are in the industry for the past 11 plus years in training and consultancy. We cater to the different transformations of digital and business, and the business and digital transformations. Digital being the site reliability engineering, observability, the AI ops, and the like. Whereas the business transformations are towards the business relationship management and the XLA, the experience level agreement, the topic on which we are here today. Uh, we're also catering to the gamification, and the simulations. Um, as you can understand, we are also present in 4 countries. Also, just to give you a brief understanding of what the topic today we are discussing here. In today's digital workplace, uptime does not automatically translate into a good employee and customer experience. Now, let me start with that statement because it perfectly captures the challenge most IT companies are facing right now. We are moving away from output based metrics like uptime, response time, towards the outcome based values, productivity, ease of work, and how people feel when interacting with digital services. And that shift from measuring systems to understanding human experience is exactly what today's conversation between Kalidas and Chris Kirkpatrick is about. Let me briefly introduce you to our panelists. Kalidas, he has over 40 years of experience working with HCL, Wipro, and Microsoft, and currently he heads the enterprise sales and India operations for TaUB Solutions. He is based in Bangalore, India. Chris, Chris Kirkpatrick is the director digital workplace at Kyndryl, expert in employee and customer experience transformations. He has worked with global clients modernizing end user experience. He's based in Woodridge, United Kingdom. Now, I hand over to the speakers to continue this conversation.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Jaya. That was nice for a beginning out there. So, Chris, let's plunge into the conversation here. So, my first question to you, Chris, I mean, like Jaya said, I've been over 4 decades with IT, and one of the things people from outside IT keep saying is, you guys come out with all kinds of jargons and acronyms which are there. So, my question to you, Chris, is that is XLA similarly some kind of a new a toy which is we IT guys would love to do, or like why is experience suddenly at the center of the digital workplace transformation? So Chris, if you could start this answering this question, it would be great.
Sure, great. And thanks for having me here today. So I don't think XLAs are new, but as we've found through many disruptions over the years, people change slowly. So, I mean, we've started to look at XLAs going on 10 years ago now, is when we first started looking at experience. And actually, my first kind of entry into the experience focused world was when I was in a different role working with clients directly, when I was working in more technical sales. Um, as we were kind of getting the onset of cloud and big data and all of these other kind of trends that were coming at the time, I remember sitting in a customer meeting and I was part of the team reporting the status of a service we were running. And the person on the other side of the desk, the customer service manager, kind of challenged me and said, "You keep talking about cloud and data and all these analytics you have. Why don't you use it? Why do you not use it proactively? Why are we waiting for things to go wrong before we then look at continual service improvement and making it better?" And I remember in that moment, I was a little bit stunned and thinking he's completely right. That's completely what we should be doing. We have all these new capabilities and we're not using it. And so that kind of was the beginning of my entry into this world. And I moved into the offering team and started helping to develop a service that was more proactive rather than reactive. But I think if we shift on to how has this now become, the buzzword or the most important thing in a workplace service, it's all the disruptions that have happened. Clearly, the pandemic was a big disruptor and accelerator of this, but things were already starting to change in terms of the proliferation of devices, the rise of the distributed workforce, and the kind of consumer shift in expectations of what people expect of their workplace. But then when the pandemic happened, it really shoved it forward a lot further and forced people to work in new work styles. And even industries that would never have dreamt of working in a remote or hybrid model were forced to work in that way, and it proved that they could. And so I know even my own wife worked in a social services environment where it wouldn't have been dreamt of that you could have worked from home at all because of the data sensitivity that you were dealing with. They were forced during the pandemic to do so. And then it obviously changed the way and created opportunities and disruption. So I think really that's what accelerated it. And then now we move on 5, 6 years to where we are today. That changing work style has driven people to have to look at things differently. Suddenly we have a different setup. Everyone's working in a different place, working in different networks, working in different parts of the world, working through different devices. It's harder to control the working experience from a platform and a technology point of view as it used to be when people were always in an office inside a network. So therefore, the experience that people are having is different. And if you don't have visibility of what that experience is and data to measure it, then you can't really help them as effectively as you used to be able to in an office. So I think when you put all the mix of that together, that's really what's driven in a digital workplace environment, particularly, but it's now starting to span across other technology domains, why experience is really so important.
Thanks, Chris. I think thanks for setting this tone because it's very interesting what you say that experience has always been there, but it's now become more critical and probably more thing to basically measure. So before we go ahead, I thought, I mean, we've got enough participants. I just want to run a quick poll out here and just capture a little bit of details. So let me just launch the first poll. I'll just give out a minute for everyone to please respond. So there is this question that in your organization, which statements best reflects how IT success is measured today? So if you could please answer this question.
I'm interested to see the answer on this one because as I have this conversation around the world, you see different trends in different industries on how people answer this question.
Right. So even I'm curious because the bar is keeps shifting as I can see. I'll just give it another 10 seconds before I can end the poll. Okay, I'm ending the poll now and I'll just share the results, which is there. So very interesting.
Yeah,
I
good spread.
thought, yeah,
It's an interesting spread, and it's good to see. I mean, if you'd done a poll like that, around the time of the pandemic or before, you would have had nearly a full, 90% answer on the first one
correct.
because things change. But certainly, it's good to see. It's good to see that shift has moved. So that's interesting information.
Correct, correct. So let me now just plunge into the more deeper discussion about XLA. So my question to you, Chris, is that for people who have worked in SLA for a very long time, what exactly XLA in very simple terms, which is there? Because I think most of the participants here have come from IT operations, have measured SLA for long time. So for them, in a very simple way, what exactly would XLA be?
Sure, and I'm just sharing a bit of material here just to help kind of talk around it. But in simple terms, an XLA is a contractual measurement. So in a nutshell, it's something that goes in a contract as a commitment. But the difference between a traditional SLA and an XLA is that it focuses more on impact. So the question an XLA is focused on is this service, whatever that service is, working for the business? And it's a broader, more horizontal kind of look at how things are running rather than something that's a bit more vertical. So in a nutshell, it's just a contractual measurement. It's a measurement, but the difference is it's multiple data points rolled up into an experience. And then, SLAs are a kind of a traditional approach that everyone's a bit more familiar with. And actually, one of the terms that resonates the most with an XLA, and I remember having a conversation with a delivery manager for a large US bank, and we were talking about the watermelon effect. So when we start talking around a service experience, all your SLAs could be green, saying that as far as the service contract is concerned, you're hitting all your achievements that you're expected of. But the business and the sentiment of the users is red. They're not happy, and so you have this kind of term of the watermelon effect. And obviously, what you really want is a lime effect, where you have the SLAs green and also the XLAs green. So I remember explaining this to a service owner once, and they literally jumped out of their seat for having been quite quiet in the meeting and said, "Yes, that's the exact problem. That's the problem. I keep getting shown green SLAs. However, the service is not working for the business, and they're not happy." So, in a nutshell, the focus is on that problem, is addressing more deeply the data that kind of uncovers that problem.
So that's thanks for sharing that, Chris. So the other question which would come to most of the people is, uh, will XLA replace SLA, or will it complement, and how, if so, how does it like coexist along with SLA?
That's a great question. And actually, in the early days of XLAs, that was one of the most conflicting issues, is that people are obviously used to and accustomed to processes of hiring and services that are built around SLAs that they rely on. And suddenly a new service measurement comes in, people are requesting you to add a new measurement and to elevate it as an important measurement. And a lot of our customers weren't ready for that conversation. And what we've seen happen over time is people have realized that those SLA metrics are still critical. They are important quantitative data points of operational and technical measurements that we need to know, because they are the detail of what the service is providing. However, the problem with them is they don't uncover the sentiment of whether the service is actually working. So when you roll up an XLA score, and we've got some examples later we can look at as an example, you still need the SLA metrics. So I don't see it as a replacement. We actually see it as a natural evolution to encompass those SLA metrics, the important ones, into an XLA. And actually, when you think about it that way, you don't lose what you're used to, but you gain a broader perspective. And that, on the right hand side of this picture, we've got some information where it's talking about, a deeper connection to the vision of a customer. So a service provider can actually get deeper into what they're trying to provide an IT service for. Therefore, that's more impactful, and uncovering the true impacts and friction points that are hindering colleagues and employees from working. So it's a natural evolution. And if we have a few clients who have gone very deeply into XLAs, and I would say at this point they are at least on par, maybe slightly ahead of an SLA in terms of contractual importance. But even so, we don't see SLA metrics disappearing, because they are useful quantitative data points that you would keep.
Yes, so the bit comes, I mean, you did mention about the Motorwellen effect, Chris. So my question to you is that, how can XLA bridge that gap where you're talking about the SLAs being all good, but the customer is still not happy? How would XLA bridge that gap?
So because it brings in a new set of data that people don't typically put into a service measurement, and that would be the sentiment and the feedback. So although it's maybe common in a support service to capture a survey of feedback, maybe at certain processes like onboarding, people would survey a user and say, was that a good experience for you? That doesn't cater for the ongoing experience, the hidden suffering that people are going through across what they would hope is 99% of their working experience. We don't interact, hopefully, with support and onboarding very often in our working lives. If you refresh your device, if you join a new company, that might be a once every 4 or 5 year experience, and then maybe you only call support once a year. So what about the other 360, 4 days of the year that you may be working? What about your experience in those times? And so the problem with SLA metrics is they just focus on uptime and availability and response time. And it doesn't really count for how much effort a user had to put in, how complicated was it, how quickly did it resolve their problem, did it resolve their problem, and was it effective, and what was the impact of that. So the sentiment data, which can be captured in a whole host of different ways, can be brought alongside the quantitative data to then give that broader perspective. It just balances out the perspective. And we think both are important. So in the early days of XLAs, some people advocated for a purely sentiment-based XLA. We've never found that truly impactful because it kind of flips to the other extreme. It's really important to capture the sentiment, but if you don't have the technical and quantitative data to balance out the expectations of a service and what was really expected of it, then you can't quickly jump to the problem. But the sentiment being added is the really important thing.
Great. So now the next question, it could be pretty obvious, but I just wanted to hear it from you as an expert is how can operations actually benefit from moving from SLA to XLA?
Well, it gets them closer to the customer, and that's always got to be a good thing. So the short answer there is it gives you a broader perspective and it enables operational teams and client management teams to know what's going wrong before it becomes an escalated issue. So if there is an underlying set of suffering of an IT problem, friction, delays, response in transactions, at some point that will eventually become a load of noise that has to be resolved. But you get it at the extreme. And also you put the users and the business through a longer period of time of disruption while you're trying to resolve it. So for an operations team, if you move to a proactive model where you're at the very least measuring the experience around the service that you're providing, or at least the holistic overview of the service you're being part of, because that's one of the things we notice is there are multiple parts to measuring an experience. There's lots of touch points, and you may not be providing all of them, but you may be providing the core of them. So an XLA enables you to measure other points, even across services you're not providing, and roll them up into a measurement and actually use that data in a proactive way. So it really just changes the shift. And going back to that conversation I mentioned at the beginning with the client I had when I first went into the experience world, it stops that problem. A customer saying, why are you letting it get to this extreme? Why are you letting it get bad before you then come and fix it? You get ahead of the game.
Which actually dovetails into my next question, which is because when you talk about sentiment and experience, this looks very, very subjective in terms of the whole concept which is there. So, how do organizations typically start measuring XLAs? I mean, what data would they need, and how does it get measured? Because you don't measure, you can't improve, and I mean, then it becomes very subjective, right?
So we have two approaches to how to get started really. And one is we have foundational XLAs that we've provided around the services we offer. So if you buy a particular set of services from Kyndryl in the workplace particularly, we have out of the box XLAs that focus around things. And actually something I'll just show is to simplify down how we look at experience. If you simplify it into 4 domains, every service, every IT service you provide falls into 4 kind of areas of experience. You provision, onboard, and deploy things. You then have an up and running time, an uptime or a connected experience, as we call it in Kyndryl, where you have ongoing productivity. If there's a problem, you have a support experience, and then you have ongoing change. And everything in any combination we see falls into these 4 areas. So when I start talking to a client initially or trying to get started, is there a particular area of these 4 domains that you're feeling pain or friction in your business that you then want to focus on? So we have many clients who focus on the provisioning experience. That's the beginning of onboarding a service and onboarding new people, and that's often seen as a quick way to revenue. So it's a good place to start. But then support is an obvious one. I think naturally we all understand support experiences, both as a consumer and as an employee. We go through support experiences all the time. So measuring and making that effective is important. And then connected experience or productivity, ongoing productivity measurements across applications, processes, and devices and desktops that you may be using is what you're doing most of the time. So if you don't focus on that, at least benchmark what good looks like, then you find the other three domains on the bottom there rely on an expectation or a benchmark of what good is. So what I'd normally start when I bring up a slide like this to a client is to talk through where do you want, is there an obvious place you want to start? Is there an obvious point of pain or friction in your business around provisioning, productivity, support, or change that you want to begin around? Or do you want us to help unpick that for you? And so it's something that we often, through a 30-minute discussion can quite quickly with a client work out where they want to begin.
So, Chris, I mean, you talked about this coming out of the box kind of a thing, but would it change depending upon the domain or a geography or something? And how does that work in terms of measuring the XLAs?
Yes. So if you go, I mean, and the second part of the approach is obviously to co-create an XLA. So foundational ones is a great way to get started around basic services. But if a client is wanting to lean into this approach and wants to unpack that a little bit more, then we can co-create them. And when you co-create them, you have to start out with a kind of basic aspiration. It's like, do you actually know the experience that you're trying to measure? So another simple example we've got here, just to really begin the conversation just in natural language, is let's say a customer says, I'm having a bad experience in my meeting rooms and I would like to make that better. So we go, okay, so what is it exactly in the meeting room that's the problem today? What should it feel like? And what are you trying to drive here when you focus on a meeting room experience? And so where I hear this come up quite often is clients that entertain a lot of their own end customers. Therefore, the meeting room is almost part of their brand. It's almost part of how they show up. So if you then unpack that to a greater level and go, okay, what does great look like? What does it look and feel like? Okay, well, a great meeting room experience is when you empower people to collaborate, when you give them a spotless space, when everything is online and working and it's supporting the business. So if you can just start by articulating in English what it is that you're trying, or whatever language you speak, whatever the intent or the aspiration is, it really starts to get deeper. And then what you can see happening on the screen here is then it then becomes tangible to start going, well, how would we measure that? How would we measure those different pieces if you pull them apart? Is it the sentiment of the end user or the stakeholder? Is it something we can tell from a platform, an SLA metric that tells us if things are online and available? Is it from a kind of meeting room check that happens at the beginning of every morning? Is there another system where people go and log that there could be a problem with a particular room, and are we using that data proactively? And ultimately, is it driving growth? And that's what the customer would be wanting to focus on here. So what is the business growth they're after? Is it consultative engagements that therefore is directly linked to revenue? Or is it just a better customer experience, in which case they might look at that slightly differently? So that's how we would typically start. And then you can apply that approach to anything that you want to focus on. So for example, this week I was talking to a team around the app provisioning experience. So a particular large financial services institution were focusing on key applications, and the provisioning of new apps and the rapid onboarding of new updates into the business was really, really critical for them. So we got them to start writing down and unpacking what does that mean and who are all the stakeholders in this. And you ended up having the business owner, the app owner, the developer, and the end users, and in some cases even the end customer, who was part of the end user pool as well. So if you start thinking about it like that, we can then go, right, well, how do we measure that? And that's the approach that we take in simple terms to any engagement. We start with which domain of experience do you want to go into, or is it multiple? And then what experiences particularly do you want to focus on and why? And can we articulate that in simple terms so that we can then build on it from there?
Very interesting, Chris, what you say, because I remember as a sales guy, my requirements, since I travel a lot, would be very different from a person sitting in the office with the same laptop or the same device which is there. So probably, like you rightly said, the SLAs could all look good for me, but my requirement is probably quite different from a employee sitting in the office, or for that matter. I know there are some people who would like to do everything on their own. They won't require like a self-service kind of a persona compared to a person who needs, constant help, is probably technology challenged. So, in both the cases, you can't treat the employee as the same thing, and your SLAs could look good and the experience could be bad. So
That
that
point you're
brings us.
making there actually is a really important one, which is the differences both from generation, from culture, from geography, and there is a difference in where the leaning into experience comes. In certain regions and markets, there's a lot more focus on cost because of a reality of that. Therefore, the degree to which they lean into a good experience is perhaps not as great as some others. The industry spend on IT, you get different spends, particularly financial services have a big spend on IT. Whereas if you go into somewhere like healthcare, it tends to not be such a focus. So you have a different budget, if you like, to how much you can invest into experience. And then when you bring in the human element, the differences in what matters. Particularly, I would say Europe does tend to be leading on the experience mindset. There are definitely exceptions, and then the US and Asia kind of come at it from a slightly different perspective and a different culture in how they look at things. And the thing that we've always narrowed it down to, though, is that if you can't help people be productive, they don't feel like they can do their job. And if you're trying to set all these deadlines and targets on people, you're almost beating them with a stick with a deadline, but you're not giving them the technology and the experience that gets it done, people don't feel like they belong in their job. They don't feel like they can do their job. And that brings disengagement and dissatisfaction. And that's where XLAs can pick up that silent suffering through the sentiment that we can capture.
Very true, because this is exactly the reason the same SLA measurement will not make sense. Like you mentioned about cultural changes between different geographies, you can't have the same SLAs, which perhaps we are sometimes the IT folks are guilty in, projecting those kind of SLAs. So thanks for those insight, Chris. So just could you explain the concept of experience indicators, the XIs, which we keep hearing about? What exactly would that mean?
So basically, an experience indicator, or we sometimes call them experience performance indicators, because they came off from the world of KPIs, and we had XPIs kind of developed from them, but XIs are the same thing. They are an individual data point that rolls up into an XLA. So SLA metrics tend to be one data point, one target, one attainment rate, and it's one measurement. When you have an XLA, it's meant to be and must be rolled up into an aggregated score in some capacity, and it needs to have a mixture of quantitative and qualitative data so that you have that balance of both what's happening in the real world, technically and operationally, and also what's happening in the world of experience to balance it out. And then it rolls up. So an XI or an XPI is really just an individual data point that feeds an XLA, and they could be an SLA metric. So an existing SLA metric or KPI can also be an XI.
Great. So my next question could also be, are there any helpful tools or some kind of a telemetry sources where we can quantify this kind of an experience? I know I mean, even as a consultancy, we are very tool agnostic, but does tool make sense? I mean, what is your thoughts on any tools?
Yeah, I mean, there's categories of tool that you need to have in depending on what you're focusing on. If you're trying to focus on digital workplace, you must have the endpoint experience where the application is, where the user is. So right now we are conversing through Zoom on a device. So you need to know from the endpoint perspective what's going on. And then you need to add in sentiment through various channels that you can leverage. So again, depending on the domain of experience, those four I mentioned at the beginning, there are different options on how you can capture the sentiment because you want it to be targeted. You don't want it to be intrusive and annoying and frustrating to a user. So surveying is useful for processes, but you can also do targeted endpoint surveys at points of friction or points of automation deployments as well, or use other engagement channels too. So the two main domains of tool you really need to cover, and they can sometimes be delivered through one tool with multiple features, is some sort of DEX tool that focuses on endpoint monitoring, and then some sort of sentiment gathering capacity. But then there are often feedback loops and channels, employee engagement channels that you can leverage, potentially in some cases already. But then if not, you can also leverage sometimes those DEX tools to target a point of pain. So for example, if I was having a jitter on my call right now, and I could sense that from the endpoint. I could have a trigger that pops up and asks me if I was having a problem, and I can capture at the point of pain whether that was a disruption that was genuinely noticed by the user. And that's the sentiment that's really powerful. And it's amazing what you find out when you start capturing things. The best example I can give you that was eye-opening, for one of our insurance companies that we work with, we deployed these endpoint monitoring tools, and there was a VPN problem that we noticed proactively. And when we summed it up over a month, there were 250,000 VPN crashes for 4,000 users, so two per user every day. And in over a whole month, that only resulted in 50 service desk calls. So out of 4,000 users, only 50 of them bothered or were disrupted enough that they called the service desk, because basically they would restart the VPN or restart their device and keep going. So all that silent suffering, when we totaled that up, that was worth well over 5,000 hours of productivity lost, and nobody reported it. And because we were proactively looking at the problem, we were able to narrow it down to a problem with a particular security update on a particular set of hardware models that had a problem. And so it just shows you what you can see, all the kind of the hidden suffering that you're not aware of. And even a service desk, volume increase didn't really show how bad it was. So it's amazing what you can uncover.
Great. I think you set it up well for the next section where I wanted you to actually share some case studies which are there. But before we go, I just want to do again a very short poll which is there and just get some feedback from our participants which have joined across the globe. So I'm just going to basically one sec open up the poll which is there. Um, and So this is, have you seen situations where the IT has met the SLAs, but the users are unhappy? Again, interesting. I'm pretty sure about the feedback, would love to hear the answers.
Yeah, I'm hoping for a strong yes on this one. And again, if we'd asked that question 5, 6, 7 years ago, you'd get a yes from a service owner, but you may not have heard it as much from other channels or other managers. But I think I'm hoping to see a strong yes on this one. We'll see.
Yeah, let's see. We'll give it another 20 seconds. Yep, so let me share the yes. You're right, Chris. Overwhelmingly saying yes. And zero saying the third option, which was expected because I just wanted to reconfirm what we felt that. So yes, so we are just revalidating the watermelons syndrome, which affects everyone perhaps. So Chris, so the next section, I just, after all, they say the proof of the pudding is in eating. So can you share some powerful case study where XLA has transformed employee or customer experience? I know
Yeah,
yeah. So
absolutely. Yeah, I've got a couple I can show here on different levels of maturity. Something I would just add quickly on that last poll as well was that what's interesting when you go into the XLA world, because it changes the conversation with the client on what they really need, what the service is actually meant to be delivering. It can actually help them save money. And what we've noticed in a few scenarios is that by looking at it from an experience point of view, for example, an onboarding XLA, you may not actually need to have as tight an SLA all the way through the night on certain platforms being available because they're not being used. What really matters is they are always available when they do need to be used. And if you change your mindset on looking at that, you might be able to lower an SLA, which can lower cost, and then use that saving to invest in a better experience and making sure that it is working when it is there. And and that's something that's really interesting. We've seen that pop up more and more. Is how that kind of change in focus presents a cost saving opportunity, which is obviously always going to be important. Sorry, let me just share that again. Hopefully you can see now. So I've got a couple of examples here, and I've started with a very basic support one because that's going to be hopefully the easiest to understand for anyone who's not familiar with an SLA. However, the benefit and the impact of this SLA was really transformational. So we had one of our customers, a large commercial bank in Asia. They have 29,000 users, 600 branches. So they're a large volume, 8 million customer bank. So they specialize in transferring money between different banks, as well as dealing with end customers. So they have quite a focus on that commercial banking area. As it happens, this is one of the first Microsoft E3 implementations that was in ASEAN back in the original beginning. But we started measuring the foundational XLAs that we offer in Kyndryl. So we already provide their service desk. So we provide their level 1 support. And so we implemented our live support experience and our self-help experience foundational XLA. So we're measuring two different channels of support there. One is digital, one is manual. And what became apparent very quickly by using the sentiment that wasn't there when we had SLAs, we started to understand that the real problem for support and the most impactful kind of root cause problem for the branches was that when they were trying to transfer important money transactions between banks, when that process went wrong, it was incredibly painful and it impacted the customer experience. And we at level 1 would end up passing this ticket to level 2. And the level 2 was an in-house application team that wrote the application that they were using to do the transfers. And that team were developers. They weren't really set up to be a support service. They were there by escalation. They were there by exception. And so when it came to the branch experience, it wasn't very good. It wasn't very quick. And although they would get the problem resolved, if you called in the night, you're probably waking a developer get out of bed to go and help them. And it wasn't a very timely result. So we came in and said, how about we actually co-create a new XLA with you rather than just focusing on our foundational ones? Why don't we'll give you a new team that is always available, that will take on this level 2 support, and we can keep the developers as a level 3 support if needed, but we'll make it XLA measured. So rather than just giving us an SLA on speed to answer and first call resolution, we'll actually make sure that the intent of this will work. And the client was candidly nervous about taking the non-author of the application and just put an XLA in place, and they'd started to see the focus we were giving. They gave it a trial. And I'm glad to say it went well. And what you can see at the bottom here are the 5 XIs or XPI data points that fed into the XLA. So the first 2 you would expect, the resolution time and the first contact resolution. Did we fix the problem? Did we do it in a timely manner? But the 3 other are all qualitative survey-based questions. So did the person you spoke to on the call have the knowledge to help you? Was the communication of high enough quality that they could actually articulate to you what you need to do? And overall, how satisfied are you with that? And what we've been able to do now it's been over 12 months now, we've had 100% achievement or exceeding on the XLA performance. We have increased the mean time to resolve by 95% for the branches. We have saved them roughly 2,500 hours of out of hours cost for their developer team. And it's obviously given the users a better experience. And you can see there the end user satisfaction overall is at 93.7%. So it's a really simple example of by starting to measure experience, understanding the real problem, which is a key set of applications for a bank, we then were able to gain a new service. So from Kyndryl's point of view, that's a win from a growth point of view, but actually delivered a better service with business outcomes. So it's a really simple example that hopefully most people can get their head round. And it all happened because we bothered to start measuring experience. So that's kind of the first one. I then have a second one, which is more pioneering. And so we have a global analytics company we work with. So they're across 60 countries. And they have always been one of the most pioneering accounts we've worked with. Being a data and analytics company, you would imagine that customer experience and modern approaches is something that's kind of their lifeblood. That's a differentiation. So it helped that they had that mindset. But what we did from the very beginning, they were going through a divestiture. They're spinning out of a company, something that Kyndryl did half a decade ago now as well. So it's an interesting kind of correlation of the two there. We created the whole workplace service and in fact the whole cloud service around it too, based on an XLA-led contract. So we started focusing on the onboarding process because they're a consulting company, onboarding contractors quickly, setting up new environments, network security services to deliver consultative analytical services to their customers That's their revenue. That's the way they grow. So they were so invested in using this as differentiation that we actually built the whole contract from the ground up around XLAs and said, right, we're gonna use SLA metrics in there. We do still have SLA metrics too, and they are still penalty bearing, but we actually have an incentive. So we have an incentive-based contract. If we exceed on our XLA performance, we get a bonus. And some of that bonus gets passed back down to the people in Kyndryl who serve that customer to help them push the envelope, to help them think and aspire to a better performance. And some of it goes into a joint innovation fund that we then use with the client to fund rapid transformation projects as well. So it's a really interesting outcome-based contract that really is best in class in the industry. And what we found with the XLA measurement was we created these XLAs. We had a baselining period of about 3 to 6 months where we would look at how they were performing. About 3 months in, we could see we were already overachieving on what we thought good would be. So we upped the threshold so that when we went into the actual live contracting period, we were hitting a threshold which isn't something we could achieve all the time easily. It was something that had to be aspirational, that had to be exceptional service, exceptional performance, and experience for it to be there. And 65% of the time now, we exceed that threshold, and that results in us getting a bonus. But you can also see here this whole culture of partnership with this client, and that's something that XLAs and experience deliver, is a change in the way we partner with the customer so that we can do more, has also helped to drive all of the other outcomes you're seeing on the right there in terms of end user satisfaction, for over 4,000 hours per year of proactive remediation reclaimed, 6 million savings in the BYOD program. And one of the ones that we're always particularly proud of is the on-premise migration to cloud took out approaching 2,000 servers, and that removed enough CO2 to basically run 1,000 homes in the UK for a year. So the equivalent of what we've removed in the overhead of those on-premise servers moving to cloud saved well over enough CO2, over 1 metric ton per server, to power well over 1,000 homes in the UK for a year. So those are the kind of outcomes and the kind of partnership we aspire to and want to do with all our clients. And one of the reasons that they were able to get to this level was they really leaned into experience. And so both of the stories, I think you'll agree, were good stories for what they were trying to do. But this one is just on another level because the client has gone in and leaned in and led with it. And because they've attached the XLA measurement to their business revenue, to their growth, it was worth a bonus, and they incentivized it so that we were genuinely partnering together to drive them up to an overall kind of corporate position. So these are the two useful stories, I think, just to kind of show you what you can do with an XLA.
So Chris, this is really fascinating, especially the analytics example which you gave, because there's some of the key takeaways. One, you're basically saying that based on the XLA measurement, you could directly connect some savings, you could directly connect, including sustainability, the carbon saving, which you did. And the most fascinating and probably eye-popping is what you told me is that you as Kindle as a company has incentives for meeting the XLAs, and then you pass it down to the team which is there, because that really talks about some kind of a strategic kind of a partnership with the customer, because you have the skin in the game, right? In terms of this thing. So do you, see this in the future that all the contracts now could be more tighter towards an XLA, and your normal SLA kind of contracts are all, in the past, they're just going to go away? Do you think that's going to happen?
I think we will definitely get to a point where we have more contracts that have both than not. I think at the moment we're maybe not quite over that line yet, of that case. And when you go into very regulated environments or tight security environments, the experience conversation can be a tricky one. It's a slower move towards that focus. However, we measure experience on all accounts, regardless of whether we have an XLA in a contract. So that's something that we do proactively. We have something called Kindle Bridge, and we orchestrate and measure that regardless. But a true XLA is in a contract, and it has risk and reward associated to it, so that it becomes you're basically committing to continual service improvement. Not everyone has the bonuses that the reason that last story had the bonus is because they directly tied the intent of the XLA to their revenue growth. If we don't rapidly set up and onboard people and new environments so that they can deliver revenue to projects to their customer and get revenue, they will lose revenue. So they use it as a differentiator. They use it as an incentive focus on what really matters to their growth. And when you do that, when you locate the growth angle, then you can really look at the incentive conversation and it makes sense. If you are just measuring more of a BAU service, but you're trying to make it a better outcome, then the incentive conversation doesn't always make sense. And you can, in fact, even have penalties in some cases too. But when you have a holistic measurement over multiple providers to really put in place a true penalty bearing XLA, you need to make sure that all the parties in the process are in the game, have skin in the game contractually. Otherwise, you can't really put one party on the hook for a penalty fairly and reasonably if they can't control the other parties, perhaps the network, the security team, the back-end application team. If they can't control them, then the penalty conversation starts to be tricky because it's not going to be effective. And actually, there's been a lot of research in the recent 12 or 24 months that has proven that people that have gone down a heavy penalty bearing route with XLAs without really making it effective have actually backtracked because it doesn't work as well as, an SLA you can do it because it's one metric, but it's a different focus, it's a broader focus, and it isn't as effective to do it that way.
Yeah, in fact, that's the other question. What mistakes do organizations commonly make when they first get into XLA implementation or any XLA initiative which is there?
I guess not understanding the difference of it's not an SLA. It may use SLA data, but it's not an SLA, and therefore you must think about it differently. And that does challenge sometimes procurement processes, which are traditionally set up to run on an SLA approach. And so we've often had a process where we've had to formally respond to the RFP requirements in a certain way, which are SLA focused, and then open up the conversation on XLAs afterwards. And that's why sometimes we don't always get an XLA in a contract, is the way the process and the budgets are run, it wasn't able to fit in. However, like I said before, we will always measure experience in the background anyway, even if we don't have it contractually. That's something that we do proactively. So the mistakes people make are just not getting the intent of what it is and not realizing it's meant to be horizontal, not vertical in terms of focus. And if you get that right, then you will drive the outcome and learn. And as you saw in that first story I showed you, the first set of XLAs quickly showed the client actually we need to look at another place. And actually, the value for us is the level 2 area, not the level 1. Level 1 needs to perform, it needs to be responsive, it needs to be a good experience there. But actually, the impact of the business on level 2 is more. Those key applications are the lifeblood of what we do for our customers. So you've got to get into the intent. Not getting into the intent is the mistake.
Yeah, that's very, very key what you said. So basically, Chris, has been a fascinating conversation. I want to basically use, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a bunch of questions which are there, but before we jump into the QA, I just wanted to quickly summarize what you have, my key takeaways, which I hopefully resonate with all the participants here. A couple of points which you mentioned. One, first to begin with, SLA does measure performance, but it's an XLA which is measures perception and value because XLA tells us how people experience, and that's going to be more important in the coming future. Secondly, it is possible to meet every SLA, but still the employee or the customer may not be satisfied, which is what you talked about from watermelon syndrome. Third, XLAs need enable proactive operations because again, one of the things you mentioned when I asked you why should operations look at XLA, you said it brings closer to the customer, so you can be more proactive and anticipate some of the issues which are there even before those things really blow up. The fourth is experience measurement is multidimensional because you talked about various geographies, various cultures being very different. I mean, I also shared my personal thing where the persona could be very different. A guy who's moving around, the need could be very different than a person sitting in office. So it has to be, multidimensional, and I guess also it has to be continuously measured, unlike SLAs, which are measured for a long period of time. And then the final thing, which I think one of the key takeaways is that it doesn't have to be so big and complex, right? The XLA measurement, it is something which we are aware of, and we probably haven't really quantified it up till now. And if you divide, I mean, basically define your experience indicators, validate them with the users, and then scale. But probably what works. So it's like, I mean, the two case studies which you presented also showed up, because the analytic one was, like you said, was at a different level. But the banking example which you talked about in Asia seems to be that it need not be complex. I mean, you can start small and then you can scale up, which is there. So what I would like to do is to open up for any Q&A. You could basically put it on the chat, or raise your hand, and we could take your questions for Chris.
There is one question in the chat. Can you
In the chat, okay. Let me have a look at that. Can you read out?
Yeah, sure. I'll
Yeah.
take a look. So, Abhishek has a question. Abhishek, would you like to ask, or can I spell it out for you?
I think
You can go ahead, Jaya, or I can speak as well. That's fine.
Yeah.
So my question is there any connection between SLIs and SLOs to XLAs? And I think the follow-up question is, are there any methods that we have to measure XLAs in our organizations?
Sure. Yeah. And so yes, there is a connection to SLOs and SLAs. I think the quantitative data points are essential to put in the XLA so that you can actually balance the subjectivity of the experience that the users are stating. So you do want to capture their sentiment, but the user may not be aware of how the service was designed. So if you don't have the quantitative data points to back things up, if a user was, for example, to say, my device didn't arrive quickly enough, and then you look at it and go, well, it did arrive in the time we designed the service, but perhaps that SLA isn't correct. You need, if you don't have that quick validation, then the sentiment can become open for interpretation. So yes, absolutely, all the quantitative data points really matter. And then methodology wise, so that we were a member of the XLA Institute, so we support that kind of holistic academic approach to how you build an XLA and how you construct the sentiment. We have a couple of approaches of our own as well. The simple answer is you must have a combination of quantitative and qualitative data points, probably at least 50-ish% of it being the sentiment in terms of the weighting of how you score it, rolled up into a single score and measured over a period of time. Probably a month is a good one. It could be longer, it could be shorter, depending on the business focus. And then you must have risk or reward on that. So a true XLA, one is in a contract, two has risk or reward, and three has a combination of data points in there. But it must have the sentiment. So a purely quantitative data point XLA would not be an XLA. It would just be a combination of SLA metrics. Although XLA 1.0 was pure sentiment, personally, we've never found that truly effective. It perhaps is a good thing to capture, but it becomes a side channel of sentiment to capture without it being aggregated and put together with the other data points. In terms of the math behind that, I'm sure perhaps I can share afterwards, Callie. We can come back with some maybe in the community some examples of how to do the math behind it. But in simple terms, it's rolling up data points.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris.
So, Jay, if there are more, because for some strange reason I'm not able to see some of the chat
No,
questions. They are there.
not
Okay.
anymore as of now.
Okay. Anyone else? Any other comments? Anyone wants to add? Or, because this is all about community. You can add if you, agree, disagree. Is there anything else you
Nope. I can
Keith,
see it.
sorry. Keith, you want to say something? Did I hear you raise your hand?
Yeah.
Yeah,
How
please
did
go.
you guess? I was having a tough time of finding to raise the hand. But anyway, first of all, big thanks to Chris. I mean, this is absolutely brilliant. Uh, Chris, my question is, as I look at Kyndryl, I see you as a service provider to many organizations, and it sounds like this is an offering from your company to your customers. So one of the things I've struggled with, and I've always wondered whether or not it was a conflict of interest, is if the service provider themselves was on not only the SLA but also the XLA, and which led me to believe, where does this really belong in an organization? Who should understand it? I mean, who should be running it? Who should be owning it? Who should be sponsoring it? right? And so I think everything that I'm seeing now is it's great if it starts in IT, but it wouldn't necessarily end there. When you look at your customers, who on your customer arena, is it IT within those customers that owns the XLA deal, or is it being run by somebody else?
Great question. And the short answer is it depends, but somebody should be. That's the short, yeah, somebody should be running it. I mean, we've seen perhaps in the HR world, the employee experience, for example, sometimes falls in HR. So, because that's been part of your whole onboarding experience. But then when it starts to go into a more technical domain, then ultimately when we look at enterprise businesses, we are running complex infrastructure and applications to serve their business and their end customers. So it's absolutely essential that you have the business stakeholders pulled into this. And so in that first example, or the second example, I should say, sorry, where we had the analytical company, the customer stepped forward and helped to drive it, which made it go to another level. However, in all the other ones, we tend to drive it. So the difference is one, someone should drive it. And if the customer really does engage, if they can see the intent and the value of it, you can take it to a whole new level in terms of how you drive it. And in this world of AI, we are a strong believer that XLAs are even more important than ever as we try to change the way people work, where we have AI agents doing jobs that people used to do, but then people overseeing the outcomes of these AI agents. The responsibility is bigger, but the visibility into the detail might be more down in the detail in the technology. Their sentiment, the humanization of AI and how we measure success, XLAs are more important than ever because you're only going to get true success with AI, somebody using AI in their work, if they adopt it, and they're not going to adopt it if they're not engaged and satisfied. So I think XLAs are even more critical than ever for how we drive AI into businesses.
All right. I think there is a hand from Oluwesi. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. If you can go ahead, unmute yourself and ask the question.
Okay, all right, that's fine. That's Oluwaseyi. Thank you very much, Kali. And good day, everyone. Wonderful presentation, Chris. And I think that was very enlightening. I think I took a lot from that, and I think I was also trying to see as much as I can get from those slides. Although I appreciate if there's a way we can also get a copy of that as well to
Yeah, of
or
course.
they ingest the information therein so we can imbibe them. Okay, so my question, right, is for a company that offers, let's say, with an IT function, right, that offers services to the business divisions through third parties, right? Because I heard a part when you talked about embedding XLAs into contractual obligations, right? So I want to understand how can we go about that, right? Because at the beginning of the session we talked about the watermelon syndrome, where our KPIs appear to be looking good, right? But then the business side of things, they're not seeing the returns, or it's not yielding as much as what they expect, right? But then through us, we actually have a target, and we're meeting those metrics based on the targets and the success metrics that we've put in place, right? So now if we're trying to place those on a third party to say we have an obligation to our business teams, right? So in terms of that, we want to include that into the contracts and also make it a requirement that they fulfill them so that we can also fulfill our expectations to the business. So I don't understand how best can we introduce that to our third parties while also trying to, and I hear you talk about marrying SLIs, SLOs with the XLAs as well. So it's some guidance in terms of how we can introduce that to our partners in terms of third parties and also drive it as well so that both parties are winning in terms of risks and rewards. Thank you.
Yeah, that makes sense. And another really important question. So, as you start looking at complex services or multi-vendor environments, we start getting into the SIAM space, service integration and management, and putting XLAs across an entire service experience rather than it just being digital workplace or network or the domains of technology which on their own are big enough anyway. But when you start looking at complex global environments and driving an experience across the top, what you're typically looking at there, I try to pull it back initially to that first slide I showed you with the 4 domains. Well, a service is trying to drive ongoing change. They're trying to keep people productive, And then when there's a problem, they're trying to respond to a support experience. So if you've already got multiple vendors, you're going to have SLA metrics from them on some description. And obviously, maybe some of those are SLOs, maybe some of them haven't actually signed up to an SLA with a penalty. They might only be on a KPI or best endeavors. And if you can use the sentiment and start correlating using an XLA those data points, you'll be able to quickly prove whether if someone's on an SLO and not an SLA, that's not going to be good enough because actually they're a linchpin in this experience touch point. And when it goes wrong, it's a real big problem. So we started to use it across the SIAM space now for a while, where we make sure that we aggregate up across the technology, and that becomes quite a broad conversation. That's why we have Kindle Bridge and managed observability, because when you have network performance monitoring, security performance monitoring, end user performance monitoring, that's a lot of data that you need to roll up and simplify into a consumable data point. So when you get into the SIAM space, you do have to start being targeted first on what's the experience we're measuring. Is it a single process? Is it a single application? That first example I gave you in the bank was a simple one or two application focus across a very complicated infrastructure, rather than going across all of the cloud infrastructure and trying to do it in one go. So if you get down to what makes the most sense, then just start measuring it. The simple message here is start measuring it. Don't hold back, because you start to learn when you start to aggregate things together. And then you can start to then look at your vendors and go, right, I need these vendors and these services to hit a certain level or have a certain level of response and to be done in a certain way to give an overall good experience. And then you may need to go back into the contracting. You may have to go and revisit some of that and say, we need this particular element of your service to be higher. But actually, as I said before, maybe this bit doesn't need to be as high. Maybe you can rebalance the cost and the service to focus on what makes the biggest impact. So you have to sort of start to see the wood through the trees. You have to start measuring it. And then SIAM is a complicated space. And if you do have a lot of vendors, there is contracting elements to get into. But you almost bring common sense to the table by starting to make things visible. Bringing experience observability shows where you should go. And if your XLA doesn't tell you where the problem is, your XLA is wrong. You're missing some data points. A great example I can think of in an onboarding experience we had recently was we knew that users were not having a good onboarding experience, but the technology and the unrolling process was going fine. What we found out through the sentiment was that they didn't really know what they were doing. And then the reason they didn't know what they were doing is they didn't complete the onboarding training. And we weren't capturing that in the XLA. So if we had seen if they'd done the XLA training or the onboarding training, we could have seen straight away, well, that probably is why you had a bad experience. You weren't quite sure what to do. That makes sense. How do we make that easier? How do we make it more consumable? How do we make it more timely so that you get your education when you need it? So there's so much you can uncover when you start to get into the detail.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to highlight and for a great presentation, a couple of call outs for the session. I want to call out Robin, founder of XLA Institute, who's been pioneering some of those work that he's doing across the world. But also a special shout out to our African contingent people from MTN. We have a lot of general managers. Thanks Uday and team who's come all the way. And thanks to the whole team. So I want to kind of throw up to the team in Africa and Nigeria particularly. What's a question for Chris? Because one of the things that we are doing as part of this program from a TaUB Solutions standpoint is we want to get real world practitioners to share perspectives. So one of the things that we really think is an opportunity as MTN is embarking on their journey from SLA to XLA, how they can actually get benefited. So you want to kind of share questions or comments from your perspective there in terms of where do you see this whole journey, and any questions for Chris?
Thank you very much. So I'm not sure why my video is not coming on. It's supposed to be on.
No.
So I think she asked the question that I would have loved to ask, but this is very fundamental for us right now. There is a whole shift around experience, heaven experience. The customers should be satisfied with our products and services, both internal customers to IT, because I'm an IT, and external customers. So how does if the person wants to use our service, I'm in telecoms, right? So if you want to use our services, be trying it on the mobile phone, on the web, on the USSD, whatever channel, want to have consistent experience. And we also want to have a good experience that you can buy back. Rather, we can have a sticky one that you can come back over and again. And you can also reference us to others, right? We want to build trust so that the customer knows that for any time he wants to use this service, he is sure that it's available. It's not just available, but it's performing optimally. So if I'm going to ask a question, but I think it's related to what Shay has already asked, is to say that what measures do we need to put in place in that whole customer journey to ensure a consistent experience? So from an IT part, because those are the thoughts that are running through our minds now. We are putting in things, we don't think it's there yet, but the business is also, the customer experience team, customer service team, are also trying to do that. But nobody has the full knowledge of how to do this yet. So any help in that area would be highly
Sure. Yeah, and
appreciated.
I can think of some material I've got which I haven't got to hand, but I'm sure I can share afterwards. But you need to map out the journey. So try to simplify it down into some. It's best to start either with high value personas or high value customer areas, because then you're going to get the engagement and the focus from the business to help. So even if you're not aware of a bad experience, it's good to start in a high volume, high focus area and try to map out at least some of the journeys or processes that go across the infrastructure. So what we talk about at Kyndryl is the moments that matter across the infrastructure. There are tens or hundreds of thousands of data points you could pull, which is a bit overwhelming in terms of how do I measure that experience across the technology, virtual desktops, applications, mainframes. Where do you start? Well, you need to understand the journey from the user and from the end user point of view, which could be both customer and employee. And then what's their interface? The experience touch point initially is what's the channel, what's the interface, what's the application, whether it's on a mobile device or a desktop that you're engaging with. And then what happens behind the scenes? So you need to kind of map out the infrastructure behind it. And one reason that the DEX tools are so important in the digital workplace space is they aggregate and simplify what is a complicated set of data. Some of these tools have got 10,000 data points of what your laptop is doing right now. All of the applications, all of the connectivity to your Wi-Fi, your user-side latency, all these complicated technical bits come together and are rolled up into a single score. And behind it is a complex algorithm of weighting and scoring of what pieces of those 10,000 points are the problem. It could be your hardware. You need a similar rolling up and kind of quantitative view for your infrastructure, for your network, for your security service, for your applications on the back end, and for your cloud infrastructure. And so you don't need them all, but you need some sort of health score of the key pieces of infrastructure that play into the journey that you then uncover. And so that's why we have Kyndryl Bridge, to make that simpler. But ultimately, if you don't have those quantitative data points rolled up into a usable, consumable way, it's too much to then put next to the sentiment. The sentiment's really important, but you need a balanced view of the technology score. How well is the network performing? How effective is your security service? Those kind of things. How much risk is there in the environment? Compliance. These scores are really useful, but you don't need them all unless they apply directly to the experience you're measuring. So if I roll it back to the beginning where I said about trying to articulate in words, what the experience is, that's really important. And you mentioned a mobile device there. Another anecdote I've got of an account we had. By consistently measuring the performance of Teams, so everyone knows Teams and collaboration tools, across a mobile device and a desktop device, we were able to notice a 3x latency increase on the mobile devices. When we looked to the root cause of it, there was a subnet routing problem in the network that was delaying and causing latency to Teams on the mobile devices. So by bothering to measure the collaboration experience and how the users were kind of consuming that service, But behind it, having the technology and the scoring in place, we were quickly able to get down to where the problem was. So if you mentioned telecom as your industry there, and try to map out the customer and employee journeys, or at least pull out the high value processes or transactions that you would focus on first, and then try to align the infrastructure that comes into play and the networks and security services that come into play behind it. And then we can start to build out and how to measure it. And it's okay if an XLA is not perfect on the first pass. It's absolutely intended to evolve over time and to be refined over time, and probably more data points added over time so that you can more quickly align it. But the secret is to start and to try and start with its value.
Right. Thanks a lot, Chris. In respect of the time,
Yes.
yeah, I'll just share what we have as TaUB to offer before we wrap up. I just wanted to share that our offerings, we have some training offerings, which is XLA in a day, which is our e-learning. Then we have an XLA foundation, which is a virtual training, and an XLA practitioner. We get full details, and in case you still want to be connected on the XLA community, we have created a community exclusively for XLA. And if you further have questions, and even today's webinar will be available as a recording to this community. Please scan this. We will also send an email with these details. You can log in through that email too. We would love to have you as a part of that community. And before you completely wrap up, there is one goodie for all the patient participants who are there. We are offering a 50% off on our XLA e-learning, and it's a genuine 50% off within the next 15 days. If you basically sign up, we will be sending you those details by email. I think it's a great opportunity for you all to start your XLA journey with an XLA deal in a day e-learning course by XLA Institute, which is there. So I just wanted to mention that. And thanks a lot, Chris and Jay. If you want to have a formal thank you to be
Sure,
said.
sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris, for your insights on that shifting from the traditional SLA to the XLAs. It was quite an eye-opening session. Just as an information, we have already shared participation certificate for this particular webinar with all the participants here. It should already be in your inbox. Please, you can utilize them for claiming your CPDs. On the same line, I just thought I'll briefly share our upcoming webinar, which is on the 25th of February. Same time, 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Indian time, and 11:30 UTC. So please we will share further details on this, but just wanted to keep you alarmed about our upcoming webinar here.
Thank you so much and have a wonderful day. And Chris, again, thank you so much. Thank you, Suresh. Thank you, Alberto, for also your
Thanks,
support.
Kali, in terms of facilitating this session, and it's a great run. You saw people at about 65 people did not even drop off, and it's past 10 minutes past this one. That's the level of interest, and thanks to everyone who stayed up late as well, and people coming from all different corners. Really a great, the movement is real, and I feel that there's a real movement. And thanks, Kali, for spearheading. Kali has worked immensely to get this one done. And thanks, Chris. As I said, this is a starting point for our journey towards evangelizing XLA towards things. So we are partnering with the XLA Institute. We are partnering with APMG International, but more towards creating that value for clients globally. And we are grateful again to MTN, Uday and team. They've been pioneering their work, and on the middle of the day, they pulled into this meeting. So really grateful for this conversation. We have a lot of work to do. And final question, Chris, is how can people reach out? And I hope they can reach out to, because I'm sure there are going to be a lot of inquiries beyond this for XLA. So can they reach out to you?
Yeah,
Would you
absolutely.
want
I've joined. I'm in the TaUB community, so we can go through there, and on LinkedIn, please feel free. I regularly try to share stories and best practice and things we're doing, and other events I participate in. So more than happy anyone who wants to reach out on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah,
That's great. Thank you.
so Suresh, Chris has joined the community, our
Oh,
community.
nice.
So
Excellent.
people can
Excellent.
reach out to Chris, ask further questions. Alberto,
Yeah.
you raise your hand
Yeah.
here, Alberto.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I know we are running up, but someone made from our community a very important remark, which I don't think has been captured. It says, Aro and Neka. I don't know whether you are able to speak where you are so that you can throw more light on that, because that is very important. I believe very strongly that if the concept of XLA is early in all we do, I think we'll have a better society also, because that means even developers, while building their products, startup founders, while building their products, will factor in experience from the word go, not just because if you've shipped something, then customer starts complaining or start giving feedback. From the word go, you can actually have that enshrined in what you do. So I think she has a very great question. Say, I would actually like to have more explanation because I want to explore the maximum benefit in academic development. I want to believe she's in the school educational sector. So if you can unmute Arwa Neka briefly so that we can round up, of course, we respect time boxes here. Thank you very much. Neka, can you unmute? You are speaking, but we can't hear you.
You have to unmute, I guess.
No, she has not unmuted. We cannot hear you. You're actually muted.
Anyone can unmute themselves.
Okay, fine. I think she's using a phone, from what I see, but if she can unmute, she could throw more light to this conversation so that we can have the benefit of maybe a direction. If that is not in
Yeah,
what.
I think now we can see. Yeah, go ahead, Arwa.
Okay, yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. Actually, I'm in the academic environment, and I want to make the maximum use of it. So, and the explanations today seems to be tailored mostly to business environment and transactions. So that's why I request for more explanations, and I'm willing to join the next group.
I would definitely join the XLA Institute. I mean, there's a whole philosophy and depth of a sort of academic approach to how to build XLAs, the philosophy behind sentiment and how to ask the right question. There's a lot of detail that in the academic world make a lot of sense and people want to get into the detail of. Candidly, I guess I come from more the business world where people are looking for more help to get things adopted quickly, and then they over time go deeper. But there is a whole philosophy and sort of academic approach behind, and there's a standard that's being worked on as part of a sort of service management approach with experience management as well. So it's being formalized and submitted into the ITIL process as well. So if you join the XLA Institute, I know I saw Ari and Robin are on. I'm sure they'll connect you if you go through there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And Suresh has put
Thank you so much.
XLA Institute website link, Arwa, you want in the chat box if you want to access XLA Institute.
And Arwa,
Yes.
we'd be happy to have a conversation separately offline as well. Alberto has my coordinates, and Alberto, you can pass on that
You can
information
always
to
link
me.
me up.
Awesome. So thanks, everyone. I think we will not hold everybody respond. There's great news, plenty of conversations that please join the group, continue the conversations because we have experts who would address your queries. And thanks once again for everybody's time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Johan. Bye.